a Texas warlord who fled to the desert with suitcases of illicit cash and invented the World Series of Poker. A casino king who spent $80 million on dancing fountains just to halt foot traffic on the Strip. And at number 1, the family worth $36 billion who literally dredged sand out of the ocean to build their own city in China, then bought Nevada's biggest newspaper so you'd never read a bad word about them. Yeah, these are the 5 families that actually own Las Vegas. And forget the corporate balance sheets, true control of that neon skyline still rests with a few ruthless bloodlines who decide what you see, where you sleep, and exactly how you lose. But before we crown number 1, we've got 4 more dynasties to count down. Starting with that Texas warlord and the bulletproof glass case stuffed with $1 million in cash he kept sitting right in the middle of his casino floor. Number 5. The Binion family, the architects of the Blood Oasis. To understand the modern architecture of Las Vegas wealth, you have to dig past the corporate balance sheets and hit the desert sand. Before the publicly traded conglomerates arrived with their algorithms and boardrooms, the city was built on a foundation of absolute, unvarnished leverage. That foundation was laid by Lester Ben Binion, a man who didn't hold an MBA but rather a PhD in street survival and human psychology. In 1946, facing a deadly turf war with rival syndicates in Dallas, Texas, Benny Binion packed suitcases full of illicit cash and fled to the only place in America where his particular set of skills was a legitimate business model: the Nevada desert. How the money was made is a masterclass in behavioral economics disguised as hospitality. When Binion opened the Horseshoe Casino in downtown Las Vegas in 1951, he looked at the growing landscape of highbrow, luxurious resorts and decided to do the exact opposite. The Horseshoe was a glorified sawdust joint. But Binion understood something fundamental about the psychology of the gambler that the mobsters running the Strip did not. He famously stated his business model: good food cheap, good whiskey cheap, and a good gamble. He replaced the restrictive betting limits of other casinos with a radical concept: the Horseshoe would accept any bet a player could put on the table. If you walked in with $1 million in cash, Benny would cover the action. This transformed his establishment into a mecca for the world's most aggressive and wealthiest degenerates. He didn't just invite risk, he monopolized it. How that wealth was protected was through a terrifying mixture of violent reputation and political insulation. Binion was a convicted felon who lost his gaming license, yet he maintained absolute control over his empire through his sons, Jack and Ted. The family protected their market share not with marketing campaigns, but with psychological warfare. In the 1960s, they placed $1 million in $10,000 bills inside a bulletproof, horseshoe-shaped glass case right on the casino floor. It wasn't just a tourist trap, it was a physical manifestation of liquidity. It silently communicated to every high roller in the world that the Binion family had the capital to crush them. This matters because it proves that in the architecture of modern wealth, the first mover advantage always belongs to the person willing to operate outside the law before rewriting it to suit their needs. True power in early Vegas wasn't about the nicest hotel. It was about the absolute certainty that the house could cover your bet, and the implicit understanding that they could ruin you if you tried to cheat them. The ultimate power move, however, came in 1970. The Binions recognized that gambling was viewed as a seedy, back-alley vice. To elevate their status and bring in a new echelon of wealth, they needed to legitimize the game. They invited the 7 best poker players in the world to the Horseshoe and created the World Series of Poker. They took a game played by outlaws and turned it into a globally televised spectacle. What most people misunderstand about the Binion legacy is the assumption that the mob built Vegas hospitality. They didn't. A Texas warlord did. The Binions invented the concept of comping players, giving away free drinks, private jets, and penthouse suites to keep the money inside the building. They engineered the VIP ecosystem that every luxury brand in the world now mimics. While the Binion family eventually lost their physical casino empire due to internal family tragedies and corporate buyouts, the psychological framework they established remains the operational standard for every casino on Earth. Number 4. The Boyd family, the algorithmic extraction of the middle class. While the Binions were busy catering to the outlaw elite, another family recognized a massive untapped vulnerability in the market: The billionaires and the whales provide the headlines, but the true, unshakable foundation of generational wealth is built on the repetitive extraction of capital from the working class. Enter the Boyd family. Sam Boyd arrived in Las Vegas in 1941 with $30 in his pocket, starting as a dealer and working his way up through the operational guts of the casino floor. Today, the Boyd Gaming Corporation is a publicly traded behemoth, and the family, led by figures like William S. Boyd, whose personal net worth hovers well over $1 billion, controls a vast portfolio of properties that quietly dictate the financial pulse of the city. How the Boyd family made their fortune represents a brilliant pivot in market demographics. They realized that the Las Vegas Strip was becoming a bloodbath of competition, with massive conglomerates spending billions to attract tourists who might visit once a year. The Boyds looked the other way. They focused on the locals market and the underserved regional gambler. When they built the California Hotel in 1975, they didn't advertise in New York or Los Angeles. They targeted Hawaii. They created aggressive package deals, charting cheap flights directly from Honolulu to their casino. They built a dedicated captive pipeline of loyal consumers who viewed the Boyd properties not as a casino, but as a vacation home. How this empire was protected was through an unwavering commitment to corporate sterilization and legislative compliance. In the 1970s and 80s, the Nevada gaming regulators were aggressively purging the traditional mob elements from the casinos. When the state needed a clean, highly competent, and legally unassailable operator to take over the infamous Stardust after a massive skimming scandal was exposed, they turned to the Boyds. By acting as the cleanup crew for the state's dirtiest problems, the Boyd family entrenched themselves as indispensable allies to the government. They built an impenetrable moat of regulatory trust. When you have the absolute backing of the State Gaming Commission, you don't need enforcers. The government protects your monopoly for you. This matters because true financial dominance isn't about attracting reckless billionaires. It is about algorithmically extracting small amounts of capital from millions of working-class people on a relentless weekly schedule. Institutional wealth doesn't chase the tourist, it farms the local. The ultimate flex isn't a packed nightclub on the Strip. It's a packed parking lot at a regional casino on a Tuesday morning. The Boyd family's greatest power move was a masterclass in defensive real estate strategy. In 2007, at the absolute height of the economic bubble, they demolished the Stardust to build a $4.8 billion mega-resort called Echelon Place. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, most developers stubbornly pushed forward and bankrupted themselves. The Boyds ruthlessly halted construction. They left the steel skeleton baking in the desert sun for years, absorbing the embarrassment but protecting their corporate balance sheet. In 2013, they sold the dormant site to the Genting Group for $350 million, which eventually became Resorts World. The Boyds survived the greatest economic collapse in modern history through sheer financial discipline. What most people misunderstand about the Boyd family is the scope of their influence. They are not just casino operators, they are land bankers. By controlling vast swaths of downtown Las Vegas and strategic regional locations, they dictate the flow of urban development. They proved that the sexiest strategy in Las Vegas isn't building the tallest tower, it is maintaining the cleanest ledger. Number 3. The Fertitta family, the cultural monopolists. If the Boyds mastered the art of the local gambler, the Fertitta family weaponized it, mutated it, and used it to conquer global sports media. The Fertitta bloodline, led currently by billionaire brothers Frank III and Lorenzo, represents a terrifying evolution in how Las Vegas wealth operates. They don't just want to take your money at the blackjack table, they want to own the screen you look at, the athletes you worship, and the very culture you consume. Through Station Casinos, now operating under Red Rock Resorts, and their legendary acquisition of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC, the Fertittas possess an estimated combined net worth exceeding $7 billion. How the money was initially made was a brutal, calculated expansion of the off-strip market. Their father, Frank Jr., opened a small 5,000-square-foot casino attached to a motel in 1976. He named it the Casino. What he recognized was that the thousands of bartenders, maids, and dealers who worked on the Strip needed a place to gamble when their shifts ended. The Fertittas built palaces for the working class of Las Vegas. They expanded aggressively into the sprawling suburbs, building massive luxury complexes like Red Rock Resort and Green Valley Ranch, effectively surrounding the Las Vegas Strip with a perimeter of local extraction machines. How this wealth was protected is one of the most ruthless examples of regulatory capture in modern business history. The Fertittas didn't just buy land, they lobbied for strict zoning laws. They heavily influenced local legislation to ensure that gaming enterprise districts were strictly limited. By successfully advocating for laws that prevented new competitors from building casinos near residential neighborhoods, they effectively pulled up the ladder behind them. They created a localized, legally enforced monopoly. No outsider can come to Las Vegas and build a neighborhood casino because the Fertittas already own the zoning rights. This matters because the ultimate flex of the ultra-rich is cross-pollination. When you control the local zoning board, you don't have to compete on product quality. You compete on geographical convenience. True status is writing the laws that make it a criminal offense for someone else to open a business across the street from yours. But their defining power move, the play that elevated them from regional casino barons to global media titans, happened in 2001. The UFC was a dying, heavily regulated, legally precarious blood sport bleeding cash. The Fertittas bought the entire organization for a mere $2 million. It was a rounding error on their balance sheets. But they didn't buy a sport. They bought extremely cheap intellectual property. They installed their childhood friend Dana White to run it, and then they used the massive cash flow from their suburban casinos to fund the UFC through years of heavy losses. They used their political connections in Nevada to get the sport regulated and legalized, utilizing the State Athletic Commission to legitimize the brand. They then aggressively synergized the two businesses. They hosted fights at their casinos, driving unprecedented foot traffic and alcohol sales. They launched a reality television show, The Ultimate Fighter, funding it themselves to bypass skeptical network executives. In 2016, they sold the UFC to WME-IMG for $4 billion. It remains one of the greatest returns on investment in the history of sports. What the public misunderstands about the Fertittas is that they were never just fight promoters. They are media and data funnel architects. They used a violent spectacle to capture the attention of a young male demographic that traditional casinos were rapidly losing. They proved that in the 21st century, Las Vegas wealth isn't confined to a building. It is a broadcast signal that can be beamed into every living room on Earth. Number 2. The Wynn family, the architects of psychological warfare. While the local families were busy capturing the suburbs, the Las Vegas Strip itself was undergoing a radical, multi-billion-dollar transformation, entirely dictated by the obsessive vision of one bloodline, the Wynn family. Although Steve Wynn was eventually ousted from his own company amid controversy, the blueprint he and his family created remains the inescapable template for modern luxury. When you walk into a Las Vegas mega resort today and feel a sudden, overwhelming sense of your own financial inadequacy, you are experiencing the exact psychological state the Wynn family engineered you to feel. How the Wynn fortune was made was through the absolute, uncompromising elevation of risk. In the late 1980s, Las Vegas was stagnant. It was considered a cheap, slightly dangerous destination for middle-class vices. Steve Wynn looked at a desolate piece of land and decided to build the Mirage. Opening in 1989 at a cost of $630 million, it was the most expensive hotel in history at the time. Wall Street analysts openly mocked him, calculating that the casino would have to generate over $1 million a day just to cover the interest on the massive junk bonds issued by Michael Milken to fund the project. Wynn didn't just meet that number, he obliterated it. He followed the Mirage with Bellagio, then Wynn Las Vegas, and finally Encore. How this empire was protected was through the aggressive weaponization of fine art and sensory manipulation. The Wynns understood that to attract the global ultra-rich, the sovereign wealth fund managers, the royalty, the tech billionaires, you could not just offer them a gambling table. You had to offer them an aesthetic validation of their own superiority. Steve Wynn spent hundreds of millions of dollars acquiring masterpieces by Picasso, Monet, and Rembrandt. He hung them in his casinos and restaurants. This served a dual purpose. It acted as an incredibly stable hedge asset to protect corporate wealth against inflation, and it acted as a psychological filter. When a billionaire sees a genuine Picasso on the wall, they subconsciously register that the house is a peer, not a vendor. This matters because it exposes the ultimate secret of high-end commerce. If you build an environment that perfectly mimics the aesthetic of royalty, people will willingly bankrupt themselves just to stand inside it. Architecture is destiny. When a billionaire controls the physical layout of your environment, your free will is nothing more than a statistical probability they have already monetized. The power move that secured the Wynn legacy was the concept of the inward-facing resort. Before the Wynns, casinos were designed to lure people off the street with cheap neon. Wynn built the Mirage with an exploding volcano in the front yard. He built the Bellagio with an $80 million choreographed water fountain system. These weren't just attractions, they were physical barriers. They were designed to halt pedestrian traffic on the Strip, mesmerize the crowd, and subtly funnel them into a controlled environment where the curved hallways were purposefully designed to make finding the exit disorienting. He removed the clocks, hyper-oxygenated the air, and pumped custom-designed floral scents into the ventilation system. He turned the casino floor into a sensory deprivation chamber designed to detach you from the reality of time and money. What most people misunderstand about the Wynn Empire is that they are not in the gaming business. They are in the real estate and intellectual property business. The casino is merely the engine that funds the creation of a fantasy world. By forcing every other operator on the Strip to either tear down their aging properties and build mega resorts or face bankruptcy, the Wynn family single-handedly dictated the capital expenditure of an entire global industry. They didn't just build hotels, they authored the modern psychology of luxury consumption. Number 1. The Adelson Family. The Sovereign Emperors. Everything we have discussed so far, the street leverage of the Binions, the local monopolies of the Boyds, the media dominance of the Fertittas, and the psychological warfare of the Wynns, is merely prologue. When you reach the absolute apex of Las Vegas power, you stop dealing in casinos and start dealing in geopolitics. You have arrived at the empire of the Adelson family. Following the passing of founder Sheldon Adelson, the dynasty is fiercely controlled by Dr. Miriam Adelson and her family, commanding an estimated net worth exceeding $36 billion. They do not just own Las Vegas real estate, they operate with the asymmetrical leverage of a sovereign nation. How the Adelson wealth was originally made is the greatest contrarian pivot in the history of the city. While every other casino mogul was obsessing over how to attract the biggest gamblers, Sheldon Adelson looked at the math and realized that gamblers are volatile. They win, they lose, they cause problems. But there was a demographic that never lost, had unlimited budgets, and operated purely on schedule: the corporate conventioneer. Adelson made his first fortune creating Comdex, a massive computer trade show. When he bought the aging Sands Hotel, he didn't focus on the casino floor. He built the Sands Expo and Convention Center. He attached the sprawling, opulent Venetian resort to it. He realized that if you host a massive pharmaceutical or tech convention, thousands of executives will fly in on their company's dime, sleep in your beds, eat in your restaurants, and then, almost as an afterthought, dump their per diem cash into your slot machines. The Adelsons turned the casino into an amenity for the corporate expense account. How this multi-billion-dollar empire is protected requires a level of influence that borders on the terrifying. When you operate at the $36 billion level, your biggest threat isn't a rival casino. Your biggest threat is the federal government. The Adelsons protect their wealth through overwhelming political lobbying and media acquisition. In 2015, the family orchestrated the secret purchase of the Las Vegas Review-Journal, the largest newspaper in Nevada. By owning the press, they control the narrative pipeline of the city, ensuring that the local editorial board aligns with their corporate and political interests. On a national level, Miriam Adelson is one of the most prolific political mega-donors in American history, routinely injecting tens of millions of dollars into presidential and congressional campaigns. This isn't charity. It is the acquisition of legislative armor. This matters because at the highest echelons of wealth, a casino is no longer a business. It is a geopolitical asset. It is a sovereign wealth fund disguised as a tourist attraction. When you can personally fund a presidential campaign and dictate the editorial slant of the state's largest media outlet, you are no longer playing by the rules of capitalism. You are writing them. The ultimate power move of the Adelson family, however, was realizing that Las Vegas was simply too small for their ambitions. In the early 2000s, while their competitors were fighting over scraps of desert on the Strip, the Adelsons looked to Asia. They negotiated directly with the Chinese government to enter Macau. They didn't just build a hotel, they engaged in massive land reclamation, dredging sand from the ocean to create the Cotai Strip out of thin air. When the Sands Macau opened, it recovered its entire $265 million construction cost in less than a year. The Macau properties became a cash printing apparatus so massive that it dwarfed their Las Vegas operations, eventually leading the family to sell off the Venetian and their Vegas assets to private equity firms like Apollo and VC Properties to focus entirely on Asian and global dominance. What the public fundamentally misunderstands about the Adelson family is their endgame. They are not hospitality executives. Miriam Adelson is a physician, a publisher, and a geopolitical kingmaker. The Las Vegas Sands Corporation is an instrument of international influence. They leverage the illusion of Las Vegas to extract enough capital to shape United States foreign policy, heavily influence Middle Eastern diplomacy, and physically alter the coastline of China. They are the undisputed reigning monarchs of the gaming world, proving that the house doesn't just win. The house buys the government. The illusion of Las Vegas is that anyone can win. The reality is that the house has already taken your money before you even step off the plane. These five families didn't just build casinos, they engineered psychological traps wrapped in luxury, protected by law, and fueled by human nature. The game was never meant to be fair. If you want to understand how real power operates behind closed doors, hit the like button and subscribe to Global Status. We expose the empires that run the world.